Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Specifying Practice Group webinar. Our topic for today is specifying different products differently using SectionFormat effectively for each product type. Our thought leaders are Dave Stutzman and Louis Metcalf. Dave is a registered architect, certified construction specifier, and founding principal of Conspectus, a specifications and quality assurance consulting firm. Dave will be a speaker at the Construction Specifier Academy, February 24th through the 26th in Dallas, Texas. Louis is an architect, certified construction specifier, new grandfather again, and manages the specifications and quality assurance programs for Gresham Smith & Partners, a national architectural engineering, interiors, and planning firm. Louis is also scheduled to speak on how to write a PPG webinar on October 27th. For more information on the CSI Academies and CSI webinars, please visit csinet.org. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Your participation during today's webinar is encouraged, and we have allowed time to take questions throughout the presentation. Although attendee audio lines are muted, you may click the Raise Hand button to indicate that you have a question or comment. We will identify you by name and unmute your line, at which point you may begin speaking. If you are participating via streaming audio and do not have a computer microphone, you may also type your question into the chat box. Dave, Louis, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Erica. And what I've put up on the screen for everyone, we had some reaction last time, and I wanted to explain a little bit of this presentation technique that we're using. What you see in front of you right now is our entire presentation, and we're using a program called Prezi, which actually lets us to zoom in and move around this entire presentation. So where you may think that text is actually running off of the page and you're not seeing the entire image, you really are. It's just that it's a way of us being able to tell a story without having to use PowerPoint, and we don't want to subject anybody out there to death by PowerPoint because we've all been through too many of those already.
On the other hand, this program may give you a little bit of motion sickness, so have your Dramamine tablets handy as we zoom in and out and rotate around.
Okay, and Louis, I see Tommy Smith is on the line with us
yes.
today, so maybe you want to do a little bit of an introduction as to how you got this topic.
This topic was inspired by a really excellent article that Tommy Smith wrote for the Memphis chapter newsletter, a good decade ago, called Product Confusion, Understanding and Using Part 2 of the section format. And I sent Dave a copy when we were looking for topics for this month's discussion, and both of us agreed that this was a good idea and kind of build on some things that we'd done in previous sessions. And so we're going to be talking about how the different categories of products, need to have a slightly different approach to specify them correctly and effectively. So thanks, Tommy, and we're glad that you're online to hear us.
Okay, so specifying different products differently, and it all comes down to how we're using section format. Most of the control of the section format for the products and what needs to be done for specifying the products is really controlled by Part 2. Part 2 products has all of the listings that are required to specify the individual products, whether they're simple materials or whether they're manufactured systems, components, field assemblies, any number of different things. So,
or user-defined heading.
Or user-defined heading, absolutely.
So, I like those user-defined products. You know, Dave and I were talking a little bit before the meeting that Part 2 is really the focus of a spec section. It's really the heart, the core, and that almost everything in Part 1 and Part 3 is really secondary to the selection and correct specification of the products that are actually used in in the construction.
So here's the current section format, the 2008 edition of section format. What I've done is extracted the major headings that are used in Part 2, and you can see that the ones in all caps are indeed the bold, are the what's intended as the major article headings, although any one of these can actually be used as an article. As part of section format description this time in 2008, the committee that wrote section format identified a couple different ways that you can use Part 2. One of them is to specify the entire of Part 2 under this very long heading as the second article title, all of the caps where they're giving all the different potential names for the article that you could use. The other option is to use the lower level, the upper and lowercase titles as major article headings and specify individual products under each one of those rather than as a single article for the entire section. So this is sort of it's a major change from the concept of how section format had been used before. I think that this is leading to some confusion too about how to use Part 2, even though it's trying to be more open-ended to allow user discretion about how to use it. And
one of the things that Dave and I want to stress in our presentation today is that all of these headings are optional, and depending upon the type or the category of product that, as we're going to be discussing, you'll see that some of the article headings are will not be needed for certain types of products.
Right. So as we go through the discussion today, we've put together a key. So hopefully as we go through it, you'll be able to decipher this relatively simple key, just that we're going to look at the ones, the article titles that are probably most important to include when we're specifying a particular kind of a product. Those that are probably included will be shown up in the black text, and then the gray are those that are probably not used. Not to say that they can't be or won't be, but just in most cases probably will not be. So if we back up and look overall, what we're going to be talking about, Lewis and I have split this up into 5 different groups of products or materials in this case. We have the materials, the manufactured products, shop assemblies, field assemblies, and then design build systems. And that's the order that we're going to take this presentation in. So if we end up with a comment or a question about any one of these particular groups, or if something we're saying in an earlier group spurs a thought from any of you that you'd like to address, but it's under a different group, we can try to take the question at the time, or you may want to bring it up as we get to the group where it really most aptly applies. Okay, so the first group that we want to talk about is just basic materials. And we look at this as sort of the basic building blocks for products that are incorporated into building construction. We'll get into some examples here in a minute, but we think of these really as standalone materials that could either be used in and of themselves or could form part of custom fabrications or products, manufactured products.
Some examples of basic materials would be liquid applied sealants, for example, as an example of liquids. Paints are also liquids. Dave tells me that he often has a separate spec section for certain decorative metals that doesn't really talk much about, or even anything about fabrication, that those issues are covered completely on the drawings, but you have to specify what the basic metal is, whether it's stainless steel or Monel or some other alloy or more basic element.
Right. We see that oftentimes, and Lewis and I have both worked in the hospitality industry. Casinos and the interior designers that are involved in casinos, for instance, the decorative metals are simply a list of what those metals are because the drawings are dictating what the custom fabrications are.
So this type of section that would deal with basic materials would be just those individual components that would be put together in site-assembled assemblies. And another example might be metal decking, steel decking, because it's not doesn't come out of a box and it gets screwed to the wall, but it's a component of another assembly. But it is a basic building block, so to speak, of the fabric of the building. Oops, mix my metaphors there. Sorry.
Okay. When we were looking at these basic materials, what we're trying to get to is then what pieces of Part 2 might we be using if we're trying to specify these products. Because they're basic elements, there probably is no manufacturer. There probably really is no basic description that you really need. What you really need to identify is what is the material. Is it a metal? Is it a liquid? Is it a gas? And what might the finish be if it is exposed in the finished construction or if it needs to be protected from the elements. The rest of Part 2 is probably virtually non-existent in this case.
And for this type of spec, the most common, this type of spec section, the most prevalent forms of specifying would be the reference standard method and descriptive method in terms of just stating what the item is.
Right. So if we had something like a cold form metal stud, that might fall into this kind of a category. It's usually specified by a reference standard. The manufacturer, I don't know about anyone else, but I really don't care who the manufacturer is because we're using the reference standard. If the manufacturer is a member of SSMA, that's about all that I need to know. I think we could say similar kind of things.
Yeah, do you really have, tell me, Dave, do you have a favorite brand of cement for your concrete?
A favorite, I have to say Lehigh, you know, since I'm close by, but but other than that, no. I mean, we would rarely specify a manufacturer for cement. I can't think of an application where we ever would. Still relying entirely on a reference standard.
And I don't know about you, Dave, but I don't even know the names of any mills that produce stainless steel as a base material.
And I wouldn't either. And I think Lewis and I had this conversation where if we can think of perhaps some of the commodity type items that we're including in building projects, these are often, or I would consider them often to be some of these basic materials that really you need very little in Part 2 to describe the product. And if there's such a commodity item in some of these cases, perhaps we can also eliminate a lot of the submittals that go with those. And I know you have an opinion about that, Lewis.
Well, I was telling David that for many years on my gypsum board section, I put under submittals not required because I just really don't need to spend time looking at product data for ordinary gypsum board or even Type X. Nowadays, of course, with abuse resistant and abrasion resistant and other types, it's a little more complicated, but
we can still pretend it's not.
Depending upon the project, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so manufactured.
I have a comment from Jeff Feingold.
Sure.
I disagree. Metal decking and liquid sealants are manufactured products. Is gypsum board a material or a manufactured product? Please clarify.
Well, we'll get into that.
Jumped all over that discussion.
That's an excellent question, and I think it'll be much clearer when Dave explicates what he means by manufactured products.
Oh, thanks a lot for that, Lewis. What I want to say is Lewis and I had that very discussion this morning, and whether or not sealants or metal deck or gypsum board, if you consider them manufactured products or basic materials, you could probably treat, to be absolutely wishy-washy, you could treat them either way, and it's really a matter of an opinion as to how you're going to specify them. And if we go through the manufactured products that we have up on the screen now, I think maybe, as Lewis said, you'll see the slight differences that we say or that we believe work to try to help push some of those commodity items over into just a basic materials section or an approach.
And part of the confusion is just lack of a better term than manufactured. Obviously, steel studs are manufactured, but they're not quite the same thing as what we see the content of this category. So why don't you describe this category for us, Dave?
Okay, well, manufactured products, what we're looking at is things that require some level of assembly by a manufacturer, or something more than, in the case of a metal deck, than taking a piece of sheet steel and putting it through some rollers. So we're looking at some level of catalog type item where once you buy the item, you can take it and effectively fasten it to your building structure and be done, so that there's no additional work in the field to be able to create the item. It's already come shipped to the site completely ready for installation and use. Manufactured products can still be standard or custom products. There still can be customization that the manufacturer could do for you in their shop. They should be fully shop assembled, like I said, come out ready for installation, so that it's simply an attachment to the structure.
We could call this category out-of-the-box products.
And maybe that's a better way to describe it. It's,
because that's, you can see from the examples here, that's what we're thinking about, is that now when we say windows here, we're talking about, of course, factory-assembled windows, not site-assembled windows made from storefront framing. But a window that comes out of the box, it gets screwed to the wall, or both doors that gets installed into the wall, toilet accessories, air handlers, light fixtures, and all those bits and pieces, mirrors and so forth, maybe even column covers that are factory formed, those kinds of things. And what articles might we use to specify these things, Dave?
Well, here's our take on how these are normally specified. We normally do have a product name that we can attach to this. In the case of toilet accessories, that would replace the article title as the product name. There usually are specific manufacturers associated with it, because we're likely to be specifying a basis of design. Even if we're and this is one where we care who makes it. A good point, right? Because not all of them are going to have the same aesthetic or the same options to choose from, and many times that becomes a driving force for making the selection for basis of design. So I find myself listing the manufacturers, usually identifying a basis of design product, and then generally describing what that product is. It may take some performance in the case of a window or a door. Toilet accessories, I don't normally see a performance for toilet accessories. and it will usually require description of the materials that go into the constructed product. For instance, in a wood window, you have choices of different wood species, or in the case of a clad window, what the cladding material might be. And then ultimately,
whether or not you'll accept finger-jointed wood for interior.
Right, depending on the ultimate finish, and then whether it is a factory finish or a field finish. And because these are products that need to be attached to the structure, most of them are probably going to need some sort of accessories, whether it's fasteners, anchors, and potentially some seals and that sort of flashings to try to complete the assembly with the surrounding materials. So the spec types, Lewis.
Well, the common methods of specifying this category of products would be proprietary and descriptive, or a combination of them. One of the things about this category of products is there's usually not a reference standard that governs the total thing. Now, in the case of windows, for example, there are reference standards about performance and certification of the performance standard, but it does not specify, you could say the performance standard, but that performance standard could be met by an aluminum window, a wood window, a steel window. So it doesn't specify the whole item that we want to specify in a single reference standard, unlike the basic materials, where there's a standard reference standard for cement and even for sealants and things like that.
And even though we're saying proprietary, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a single product or a single manufacturer, because we can still have open or closed proprietary specs. So we could list multiple manufacturers, multiple products, or even, as I was suggesting, as a basis of design product, and still allow for others to be able to bid on these particular kinds of specifications.
Yes, and to help fend off unnecessary and annoying substitution requests, I usually find it very effective to, even if I'm going to name names and product number, model numbers, to have a brief description of what the product is and its salient features that I want to try to fend off the folks that may have a similar product but doesn't have all of the qualities that I need for this particular project that I'm specifying. Then too, many of these manufactured items have options that you have to select, and so that gets you into also the descriptive method of specifying. What's the next category, Dave?
Well, wait a minute. It's never easy, is it? I mean, we say proprietary or descriptive, and even you do that here, you still can't just name a Anderson Model 200 series window and be done, because there are way too many options to choose from.
That's right.
Okay, the next one we decided was shop assemblies. And what I see shop assemblies as is, it could be a single product, it could be multiple products, but it's something that's put together by the manufacturer in their shop. And I would tend to believe that most of these are going to be multiple combined products, and that they would still arrive at the site as an assembled product. Now, it may be something that you need to assemble multiple of to form the end result of the project. So, but it's really a field, arrives at the project site fully assembled. All we need to do is attach it again to the structure, but it's going to include more than one item.
And one of the distinctions between this and the previous category is that these things are not laying around in the warehouse. That these are generally custom manufactured for your specific project to your specific needs and requirements.
And exactly right. And that the design of those systems is generally falling back to the contractor or the manufacturer, because they could involve calculations as the major item, or it could be just because, as you say, it's a custom assembly, so that fitting all the parts and pieces to make it work with the project conditions is something that's going to have to be delegated to the contractor or the manufacturer, since they know the systems better than the designers.
If I can interrupt you for just a minute, Dave, your sound is going in and out a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much, Erica. I'll try to stay more in touch with the microphone.
Thank you.
Some examples of this category are on your screen here, and of course precast concrete is totally custom. There's no standard sizes. Now metal stairs, of course, are assembled from standard bits and pieces, treads and risers, but again they have to be custom fabricated to meet the specific floor-to-floor heights and width of the stairs that are necessary. Unitized curtain wall, where there is some shop assembly, is another example of this, and of course architectural woodwork. One of the great things about BIM is that it allows people to prefabricate ductwork and bring it out to the site in large pieces that can be rapidly assembled on site, rather than having to have a guy with a press brake and riveting and other tools to out on the site, making them from hand.
Okay.
I have a comment from Wayne Nancy.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, Wayne Yancey. Using toilet accessories as an example, attributes and salient features are inherent in the model number. I typically spec only the model number plus options where necessary. Fire extinguisher cabinets is another example of what you get is in the model name number.
Yes, that's very true. It depends upon the nature of the product, that some of them are very highly individualized. On the other hand, right now I'm in the throes of writing a spec for a maintenance lift, and there are dozens of options. It's like buying a new car, and you have to decide, well, you know, do I want a gas engine or an electric motor? Do I want wheels, or do I want tracks, and so forth? And even within a given model number, there are an extensive length of options that have to be selected and specified.
Erica, I see a couple more with hands raised. Did you have more questions?
No, I don't have anyone with hands raised.
Oh, okay. All right. Wanted to make the point, Lewis was talking about unitized curtain wall as a shop assembly, and just to make the distinction that if it is not a unitized curtain wall, if it's field built, that we really feel that that's something that falls under a different category of material, because we're in this shop assemblies, we're really looking for something that comes from the shop, essentially fully assembled, ready for installation in the field. So in part 2, article titles and items that we would like to see included for this group. A system or assembly name, in this case curtain wall, if we're staying on that as an example. We may list manufacturers, although it's not necessary. Some of those are still going to be custom designed. We'll probably have a description to try to decide or try to convey what really the intent of the assembly is, since we're trying to put multiple pieces together. We're very likely to have performance and design criteria, because it's probably going to have to meet some structural performance and maybe some, in the case of curtain wall, environmental performance. And we're certainly going to talk about assembly and fabrication, since we're expecting it to arrive on site fully assembled so that all we have to do is attach it to the structure. The other things that we have listed as black, you can see that many or most of the items, except for the mixes, are probably going to be used from Part 2. Because we're looking for this as a shop assembly, generally I find myself relying on the source quality control to ensure that what arrives on the site is indeed what we had expected. We're looking for manufacturers to do shop testing, shop verification, shop inspections to make sure that they're complying with the specifications.
Methods of specifying this category of product would be proprietary, although that's not necessary. There will be reference standards, as Dave mentioned, especially regarding air and water infiltration performance and other standardized testing that might be available. Certainly descriptive. We'll need to know how long, how wide, what the profile shape of the curtain wall is, and so forth. And then performance requirements, because some of the performance requirements beyond air infiltration rates, for example, on a curtain wall, have to do with what is the acceptable deflection on this building that I've designed. What is the building movement? Is this a curtain? Is this a glazing system for a three-story building that's not going to move that much, or is it for a high-rise building that may sway several inches or even a foot or more at the top?
And which one of these do you think is likely the most used, Louis? Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, no, because this is a wide category. For example, with respect to precast, you may or may not specify a specific manufacturer. You may just list that as being a fabricator that meets certain PCI level certifications, rather than naming specific names of precasters. On the other hand, if it's curtain wall, you may want to limit it to the firms, the aluminum pushing firms that you have a certain amount of experience with and confidence in.
Okay, I would agree, and I think that looking at the list of the spec types here, this is the one category, because of the complexity of the product, usually will use one or all four of these systems.
You're certainly going to have some description in there,
right?
And probably some performance requirements. And of course, it depends upon the nature of the project. If it's a GSA building, you might not want, or other government agency, you may need to avoid naming proprietary names and keep it wide open. Other government agencies and private individuals may want to have at least 3 names to ensure some competition. And of course, some private firms may even have a preference on the manufacturer. I know of at least one of my clients that has a real preference on the brand of elevator, so I don't even specify somebody else's elevator.
There are always those individual preferences.
That's right. Got to keep the client happy. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. Okay, field assemblies as opposed to shop assemblies. And what we're trying to get to here is things that will be essentially fabricated by the contractor on the site, that he will collect individual products and put them together to form a system that the designer, the architect or engineer, has actually provided detailed design drawings, assembly drawings, to show how all of these things are coming together. It really takes a lot of effort on the part of the designer to ensure that the interfaces and the connections are specified or shown on the drawings to make sure that all of these assemblies are actually functioning as they should and functioning with the surrounding materials that they're attaching to or interfacing with.
That's a very important distinction, Dave, that I want to follow up on a little bit, that these field assemblies, and you'll see this when we get over to specific examples, in this case, the performance of the building element, exterior wall or whatever, is the responsibility of the design team. They're the ones who pick products from multiple manufacturers that have to go together, have to be compatible, and have to work together to provide the desired performance and characteristics for that building element. Whereas in the preceding category, the curtain wall is basically a single source responsibility, and so in the majority of your, if you have a building that is primarily clad in curtain wall, there's a single person, or single entity, I should say, manufacturer, that takes responsibility for performance of that entire wall system.
And so true, because those interfaces, wherever we have problems in buildings, it's going to be at an interface. We have
Yes.
water penetration, it's going to be at one of those system interfaces. Somehow or other, a lot of those interfaces, the connections, are left to be somewhat nebulous, and if we're not detailing them or not specifying them, we can certainly end up with unintentional results. Water in the building is something that I would never intend, for sure.
I have
So
another
some
comment
examples.
from Wayne.
Sure, go ahead.
Words and pictures. Would the description not be better left to drawings for unitized curtain walls and precast?
It's a combination. It's real hard to indicate texture and color on black and white two-dimensional drawings. So we have to have words. On the other hand, how long and how wide is typically a drawing feature. So it's a combination, and we need to figure out where is the best place to put each type of requirement, and of course that is some judgment and sometimes up to personal preference, but you're going to need both.
Well, and one of the things that I try to impress on our clients is I want to make this as simple as I can for everybody. So if I can say it in a sentence or in a paragraph, I'm happy to put it in the spec. And especially if that helps the designers avoid numerous annotations on the drawings, because it's all about saving time and conveying the information the most efficient way that we can and in the best possible location to convey that information. So
and that's the key, best possible location. Say it once, say it right, in the right place.
Right. So we
Ruth
need.
has her hand up. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
No, go ahead.
I want to say Ruth has her hand up. Ruth? I believe Ruth is listening through the computer. Ruth, if you'd like to type your question. I'm sorry, gentlemen. Can proceed.
Okay. So looking at the field assemblies, the kinds of things that we're expecting to see then in Part 2, again, the system or assembly name, definitely a description of what that assembly is, because now we're trying to bring multiple materials together, and we need to try to go back and describe how all of these materials are actually fitting together, what we're expecting as an end result, and if there are any particular project requirements that are particularly key to make sure that we get the aesthetic and the performance when we're done. Because we're bringing multiple materials together, we're also going to spend a good amount of effort on describing those materials in Part 2. The performance will most likely be there because depending on what the field assembly is, if it's exterior wall or exterior roof, anything having to do with enclosure will certainly have performance as weather enclosure, structural performance. If it's on the interior of the building, it may be less likely to have performance unless it's something such as acoustic, or if it's indeed a structural element on the interior of the building. We're very likely to have accessories involved because we are assembling multiple products, and we'll need the accessories to make those attachments and make the connections between the various systems and assemblies.
Dave, why don't you take a minute and talk a little bit about what the concept of accessories within SectionFormat. What the heck goes in that article?
What goes in it? Oh, I've seen,
as opposed to the basic or main materials.
We've seen virtually everything in accessories because it could easily be a catch-all article title. I like to try to look at the overall content of the spec section, what really is the main heading of the section. And if a material or a product is the focus of the section, in this case we're talking field assembly, so going back to one of the examples, exterior wall, masonry wall, it would certainly be brick. It would not as accessories, but as main products would certainly be brick, would be the block, would be the joint reinforcing. I do not consider that an accessory because it's key to the function of the wall assembly. Mortar, flashings, all of those are key. Now, if we're talking about sealants for the soft joints, the control joints that you have to do in masonry, that to me can be an accessory.
Weep vents?
Potentially. I sometimes most often specify those with the flashings because they're so integral with the flashings, but they could be an accessory.
Yeah. So it's kind of the miscellaneous bits and pieces that are needed to supplement the primary products.
Correct. But I would never try to put any of the primary products into an accessory function. Did you have something,
Excuse
Erica?
me, Bob Machalat has a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob. Bob, are you there? Bob, if you'd like to ask your question, please type it in the question box. We do have one from Seth Wiley. For something like this, would a specifier be able to call out that contractors and subcontractors view certain, say, physical designs, proof/design development mock-ups?
I'm not sure I caught all of that question. Could you do that one more time, Erica?
Sure. For something like this, would a specifier be able to call out that contractors and subcontractors view certain, say, physical design proof/design development mock-ups?
Well, in general, you're going to have mock-ups to show how the bits and pieces to go together, and those mock-ups would be specified, of course, in Part 1, and they are really necessary to demonstrate the coordination and the level of workmanship, because this category of products requires a little higher level of skill than the stuff that just comes out of a box and can be screwed to the framing or screwed to the wall or bolted to the floor. Because, again, we discussed at the beginning of this category, this is a question of responsibility, and the design team has to take responsibility for the performance of a masonry wall. We can't unload that responsibility onto a designer unless we take a purely performance method, such as in a lease build-to-suit design build kind of project. But in general, we have to take responsibility for taking the brick from this manufacturer and the flashing from that manufacturer and the joint reinforcing from this guy, and putting that all together in a way that makes sense and keeps out the wind and rain. Does that answer your question, sir?
Well, and I think I'd like to add to that, Louis, that these field assemblies are something that is indeed custom.
Yes.
They're one of for a particular project, and if you're going to ask for mock-ups of anything on a project, these are prime candidates.
Absolutely.
And
I have another question from Bob Massalot.
Go ahead.
Materials can be either a major article or a sub-article. Are there any pros and cons in structuring Part 2 of a specification? And then he had listed materials, manufactured products, or manufactured products with materials following.
I'll let you take that one, Louis.
Well, actually, what we're kind of proposing is going along with the new version of SectionFormat is getting away from kind of that concept, so that you take a basic different approach to these categories, and we don't need all of those articles in every one of these categories of products. Now we might in this specific category, we might have multiple, in effect, materials articles. So you might have the actual masonry, in the case of a masonry wall. You'd have masonry units. It might include, you might have multiple brick types, you might have calcium silicate masonry units, and as well as block. And then you might have a separate materials article for the constituent products that go into making up the grout. And then a separate materials article for the flashing and its related accessories, and so forth.
Yeah, I think you're right, Louis, that in this case, especially talking field assemblies, that it's highly likely that you'll have multiple materials articles. I would suggest, though, that we still would have an overriding system or assembly article with the description and with the performance, because we need to look at that as an entire assembly. And if we need the multiple materials articles, that would be fine to try to help not get too deep into a specification outline structure, because that makes reading the spec just terribly difficult. So if we can organize it at a higher level and take that materials article, push it out, or push it up to a higher level as an article, as opposed to a paragraph under the system article, I think that would help in this case.
Yes, Dave and I both feel very, very strongly, we're strongly opposed to excessive subordination. I have myself received specs from engineering consultants that have 7 and 8 different levels, and so whatever you can do to simplify and keep it down to 3 or 4 levels of the outline as a maximum will make it more user-friendly, and that's what we're after. After all, if the spec is not easily read and understood by the end user, namely the contractor and its subcontractors and its mechanics, it's not accomplishing what we want it to do.
Right. Absolutely.
So some common specifications methods for this would be reference standards, descriptive, of course, and also some proprietary, because again, you have some bits and pieces that, by gum, I want, this brand of wheat vent and nothing else is acceptable, or you may have some strong feelings about who makes the stuff. On the other hand, the products that go into making up the mortar, I really don't care who makes the cement and what quarry the sand comes from, as long as it meets the reference standards that I specify.
I'll agree with that.
Dave, we need to get on to the next one here. We're getting
Yes, we do, because we're coming up on
the
about
hour.
10 minutes left. Yes. Last category, I think, is probably, it seems simple, but it's probably one of the most complicated of the categories that we have in design build systems. We're talking about complete systems. They're all field assembled. They're always contractor designed. And that poses some problems for the designer, because now he needs to be able to pass along that design criteria to the contractor. If we don't specify the design criteria and don't specify it correctly, there's no hope that we're going to get the intended result. So it puts a lot more onus on the designers than they might want to believe, even though they're not specifying all of the individual components.
As a matter of fact, one of the characteristics of this type of product is that we often don't get very deep into specifying the constituent products, that we're more interested in the constituent materials that make up the product or the assembly, the element, because we're more interested in what does the final result look like, how does it perform, and we're much more likely to have some other methods of controlling the quality. So we can specify whole buildings this way. Pre-engineered metal buildings are done this way, or entrance, canopies and walkway covers and so forth. And of course, there are even design build specs for plumbing and HVAC if the architect is too cheap to hire a consultant.
Especially on residential construction.
Especially on residential or tenant improvement projects. We do this all the time on interior design projects that are tenant improvement projects. Another thing that we might add to this list of examples is that, as David mentioned earlier, he and I both have done a lot of work in the entertainment and hospitality project. I also worked for a firm in Cincinnati that did a lot of work for the zoo up there. And there are many times when I can describe the end result of what I want, and I may specify the name of a specialty subcontractor that I have the confidence in. But we had a project a while back at my previous employer that was for an entertainment project that had flames shooting out of the walls and some special materials and so forth like that, and I wasn't about to specify valves and pipe sizes and things. So we took very much a performance design build approach to that.
I would have liked to see that.
I have another
spec for the
question from
flames.
Bob.
Go ahead.
Where are the major software providers, VSD, MasterSpec, SpecLink, regarding this new approach?
Excellent question.
It is indeed. I think you'll find that I'm most familiar with MasterSpec at the moment, and they are in the process of updating their sections according to the newest version of SectionFormat. And they have these options in there. And of course, one of the things about the published master specifications is that they have to cover all the bases. They have to cover everything from a privately funded tenant improvement project that doesn't even have an exterior wall or envelope, up to a multi-building campus for GSA that has to be publicly bid and is extremely complex. So you have to go through, and that's one of the reasons why we thought that this session might be useful today, is thinking about not only the materials and the type of project, when you get into part 2, which is where you should start, you need to think about, well, what do I need to communicate the requirements on this particular project for this particular client?
Okay, and here following on then with design build, what we're looking at is mostly going to be a description and performance for the particular design build element, whether it's an entire building or an entire building system. There may be some concern for finishes and materials only because of an aesthetic value, especially if it remains exposed in construction, and maybe some operational concerns. But other than that, it's going to be...
We want the right color flames coming out of those in those orifices.
Yeah, correct. I mean, that would be really important, at least to some.
So common methods of specifying, of course, are reference standards and descriptive. We have to tell them what we want, and performance requirements. And as I mentioned, sometimes on these you are going to specify manufacturer requirements, or even list manufacturers, or if it's a truly completely custom fabrication like we find inside casinos and so forth, you may want to specify the specialty subcontractor. And we may need to, I know this is pushing the limit a little bit, may need to kind of clarify exactly what that person is that entity is responsible for in terms of the scope. And there may be some ancillary bits and pieces that we don't want the GC to farm out to a different subcontractor.
Right, and the specialty subcontractor, a great example is if anybody's been to Las Vegas and you see the theming that goes on in front of the casinos, all of that's being done by usually a single specialty contractor. The architect will develop only the visual concept, and it's turned over as design build. So we're here at the end of our discussion now. We're back to the main emphasis of part 2. And just remember, as you're writing specifications, or if you're reading specifications, the focus really for this spec is here on part 2. This is the guts of the spec. It's what produces really the end result that all of the designers are hoping to achieve. And I know, Tommy, you haven't spoken up here, or didn't chime in. I hope we've done justice to your that you presented so long ago, updated to today's section format.
Yeah, and thanks again for inspiring us. I want to say hi to my good friend Dennis.
From Thomas Smith.
Okay.
Thomas?
Yes. Lois, one thing you might just remember, specifications define a product. So it's the role of the specifier to actually go through this and define what a product is in the specification section. And each time the specifications actually answer some of these ambiguities that has arisen in this discussion. So.
Well said, Tommy. Thank you very much. I want to say hi to my good friend Dennis Elrod, who earlier this year had a new assignment and took over some of the specifying chores at my previous firm, and wish him well in that noble endeavor.
And I will say, just in closing today, it's been really nice to have everybody here. We had over 50 people joining us today. I think that's one of the highest numbers that we've had attending one of these sessions. We're really doing this to try to help everybody that's attending. So if you have suggestions, if you have comments, if you have topics that you would like to see addressed, we would love to hear from you. You can email Erica at CSI, or you can email Lewis or myself, and we'll be happy to try to get some of these topics on future presentations. So we're right at the hour, and looking ahead to November, we'll be meeting again November 4th, same time, 3 o'clock Eastern, and we hope all of you can join us then. Lewis?
Dave and I were thinking about maybe doing a follow-up program to discuss how these different categories might be specified in Part 3, the different execution requirements. And if you think that's a good idea or a bad idea, give us a little feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending the October Specifying Practice Group webinar. As Dave mentioned, our next meeting is November 4th at 3 p.m. Eastern. You may now disconnect.
Okay, well, I'll talk to you next month, Erica.
Yeah, thanks for